Yeah.
Well, I want to quickly jump off of this point about dress and make a counterintuitive point about the danger of cultures. I think you're absolutely right, that dress in and of itself has a power all on its own. As we've also heard from my colleague here on my right, a very symbolic act. One of the most vicious, responses that I've gotten comes from self-described moderates. Muslims. My favorite example is of a moderate Muslim man, self-described as moderate, who wrote to say, Irshad Manji, you lie so much about Islam that even your hair rises up in protest. Okay? Good. Which I thought was very funny. And I wish that all of my adversaries had such a great sense of humor. But then this man took his so-called sense of humor one step further. He wrote me a second email to call me a prostitute, a whore, for standing in front of audiences without being fully covered and daring to speak my mind freely.
But does that shock you?
Well, here's the thing. It didn't shock me enough to stop me from speaking. This time I wrote back to say, brother, here's my question for you. Doesn't giving me material for them make you my pimp? And I never heard back from him. But here's the real point I'm making, is that whether it's dress or whether it's hair, culture is so powerful that it's not just the so-called extremists and fundamentalists who are steeped in it. It is also the people who define themselves as moderates who you think have the same values that you do. I simply ask all of you to remember that your freedom does not stop at the border of culture, that in fact your freedom must be increased to think and reflect and analyze when you are looking at the way cultures, both good and bad aspects of cultures, manage to influence people who should otherwise be more reasonable and rational than they're actually behaving.
Given that what you've just said and given how you've all been talking, do you really think you can teach people moral courage, which is what you're doing?
It's a great question. It's a question that I think time will answer for us and not merely, being able to say yes or no right now. I will say this as an example of how I think moral courage, the willingness to fight cultural conformity and intellectual intimidation and self-censorship, how moral courage can at least be given a fighting chance. And it's, again, using new technologies, actually. In the last 3 years, the most common question, Ursula, that has come to me through my website is this. Is it true, Irshad, that as Muslims, we cannot marry people from outside of our religion? Because these young people are saying that, they are, particularly when they migrate to the West, in Europe, for example, they're falling in love with non-Muslims. Of course, makes sense. And their parents and their imams are insisting that Islam forbids you from marrying outside the faith, and they're writing to me in desperation. Now, my answer, as I think you know, is that Islam can be interpreted much more progressively than that. But then, after the 10th or 11th time I got this question, I thought to myself, what imam is going to care what a spiky-haired, Western-raised, Muslim-Canadian feminist has to say about the Quran? No, let me get smarter than this.
There was one in my country who would have cared, but
yeah?
Unfortunately he died.
Okay, well, then he's of no use to me at this point.
No, I think it's of use because we're bringing back, like, my grandmother.
Well, yes, she's definitely of use.
Because he went against the culture that I think...
Right, I'm just going to finish up this story in order to show how moral courage can be given a fighting chance. I went to a progressive imam in America and asked him to come up with a very concise and clear defense of interfaith marriage from an Islamic perspective, taking the passages of the Quran, of Islam scripture, that have traditionally been used to stop interfaith marriage, but reinterpreting those passages for a 21st century context. He did exactly that. I posted his 2-page defense of interfaith marriage from an Islamic perspective on my website in English. It became such a popular download. Now, here's the final part of the story. I was in Berlin a couple of years ago giving a lecture, and young women, Muslim women in the audience, came up to me afterwards to say, thank you so much for posting this particular document in Arabic, Turkish, and German. They said, because we are in our 20s as young women, age of 20, 21, 22, our parents have tried to force us into arranged marriages. We have put this document in front of them in all 3 languages, and what they have ultimately said is, okay, Even though I disagree with this imam, at least I know there is one imam in this world who would be willing to marry you and the man you actually love, not the man that we want you to marry. So they said to me that, you know, through the use of these new medias, these digital technologies, okay, tradition has been updated, and that they are now able to take this document, and they've actually gotten social service agencies in Berlin to take this document and put it in front of distraught, desperate young Muslim women who don't know where else to turn. Ultimately, this is a sign of global interdependence. So again, it's about how we use our voices, and not just the fact that we are using them.
We have them. We're coming, I'm afraid, to the end of our time, and then I want all of you to have a minute to say the one thing you would like to happen as far as free expression and women are concerned, your wish list on what you want, what you would like for the future.
You put me in a hard time, but briefly I try my best to say that my message to the children, and especially the children of my country, what they want to do for them as activists. First of all, they need, of course, for schools. Education is very important for the future of our country. That the 30 years war, unfortunately, there was no education. Those who were in power, they were against education, especially education of the women and girls in my country. We need your helping hand of democratic-minded men and women in corner of the world, in every corner of the world, as much as you can, morally and also materially. So we need your help as much as you can for women, children, and men of my country.
Thank you.
My one wish is that we not be afraid of creating tension. I ask you to remember one thing alone. Martin Luther King Jr. himself was accused of creating needless tension, not by people who favored segregation, but by people who opposed segregation. They just felt he was too radical and making their life much more difficult than it needed to be. And Martin Luther King Jr., in his now famous letter from a Birmingham jail, I really recommend that you all read this letter if you haven't already. He said, you know, the greatest barrier to African American liberation is not the transparent bigot, right? The person who is obviously racist. He said the biggest barrier is what he called the tepid liberal. Yeah. He said the person who thinks that he is progressive, thinks that he is forward-looking, but who prefers negative peace, by which he meant the absence of tension instead of positive peace, by which he meant the presence of justice.
I want to thank you very much. But really, the men, listen to my call on that, because I always remember a little girl violated at 5 years old. She was not the only one. And then beaten up and thrown into a water well, and how we retrieved her with a policeman, but how the male member of parliament would not be at the scene. So I'm the unelected one who will be at the scene to pick up bones that the mother could only recognize the strap of the shoe that refused to get off the foot of that little girl called Nyambura. And I said to God, one day make it possible for us not just to speak, but to have a material culture that speaks about the value of woman. So I dream of these peace gardens, creative history and gender centers, whatever they'll turn out to be, beside that well, beside another spot I know, which is very close to the spot where I experienced my own violence. Thank you.
For thousands of years, culture has told us that women are the other half of the world, and now some feminists are deciding that the other half are men. And my wish is that we stop that nonsense. To create peace and to eliminate violence against women and children in the world, and against violence in general, we need men. I mean, not to be politically correct and talk about gender issues and talk about sexual harassment at the office, but to feel morally indignated every time a woman or a girl is raped or a boy is sexually abused or someone in the street suffers violence. I mean, we've been working for years, and now we need men to react. And we are famous because we can talk, but we have to become, all of us, famous because we can change the world.
So, I just want to say that, just to round up, that it's been a huge honor for me to be a moderator. It was full of interest, full of intelligence, full of passion, surprises. I'm sure you'll join me in saying that thank you to these 4 wonderful women.